Before cooking, get parent permission and gather all of your equipment and ingredients. Okay, so welcome back to our kitchen demos. So what we're going to be doing today is making homemade biscuits. And what we're doing is using the two mixing methods for quick breads. You have the biscuit method and the muffin method. So obviously when we're making biscuits, we're going to be using the biscuit method, which is understandable, right? So typically when we're doing the biscuit method, we're going to measure out all of our dry ingredients, and then we're going to cut in our fat, and then we're going to add in our liquid ingredients. Now, we have to be careful, especially when making biscuits, and that's because if you overmix it, then your biscuits become chewy and tough. So, our recipe calls for 1 cup of flour, plus 1 teaspoon of sugar, plus 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and then plus a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then 3/8 cups of milk. So what I did was went ahead and pre-measured out my ingredients just to kind of save us some time. So here is our all-purpose flour, and here is our salt, sugar, and baking powder. And what I'm going to do is give it a quick whisk. Now, you could do a quick whisk on here. The best technique for this would be using a sieve and sifting them. But we're going to use a whisk because it's going to accomplish the same task. And then last but not least, we're going to add our butter. And what I'm going to do is grab a knife. And we're going to take our butter and we're going to cut it into cubes. And then go ahead and point this down so that you can see what I'm doing. So we have our butter. Now the good thing about butter, it is pre-measured. All you gotta do is read the package to determine how much butter you need. Each stick has 8 tablespoons. And so 1/4 cup would only be 4 tablespoons of butter. And you want your butter to be as cold as possible. So you want to handle it as little, because your body temperature will bring up the temperature of the butter, which then would affect the flakiness of our biscuits. And we want flaky biscuits. So we're going to use our pastry blender, and we're going to cut in our butter into our flour, like so. And again, this is the biscuit method. This is almost the way that you would make a pie crust as well. However, with pie crust, we're not using a leavening agents. Our leavening agents being baking soda, baking powder, cream of tartar. And again, our leavening agent for this recipe is baking powder, which is our chemical, which is going to allow our biscuits to rise. All right, so at this point, we're ready to add our milk. And I like my biscuits to have little chunks of butter, like so. Because again, it's all about that flaky texture that we're going to create. And so we're going to add our 3/8 cups of milk. And again, we avoid over stirring, because we just want our dough just to come together. All right, so at this point, it's come together. And what we're going to do is take our biscuit dough that looks like this. And we're going to turn it out onto the table. And we're going to knead it. About 10 to 15 times. We don't want to overwork our dough until it comes together. Like so. And so now I'm going to take my biscuit cutter and then cut my biscuits out. And then I'll reshape my dough one more time. And typically, you only have to do this once or twice. You want to make sure your biscuits are as even as possible. And then we're going to get our biscuit pan. Get our baking pan and put our biscuits on it. We're going to put them as close together as possible. And that's going to keep them from spreading out. And we're going to bake them at 425 for about 15 to 20 minutes. Just a couple pro tips when making biscuits. One thing, what I like to do when I'm making biscuits at home is I'll put once I've cut in the flour and the butter together, I'll put that in the freezer for about 10 minutes. And then I'll add the milk, make the biscuits, form them, and then put the biscuits in the refrigerator for a little bit. Because again, the more the butter has time to harden back up, the more flaky the biscuits will be. So just a quick pro tip when working with biscuits. Welcome back to our demonstration area, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to begin using the muffin method. And the best way to do that is by making muffins. And so we're going to make some homemade blueberry muffins. Our recipe calls for 1 cup of all-purpose flour. I've already pre-measured that. It also calls for 1/4 cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to go ahead and add my dry ingredients together, and I'm going to whisk them together. Again, you could use a sieve. That's probably the best method to make sure that everything gets properly incorporated. But as a baker, I know that I can also use a whisk in order to do that. Now we're doing what's called the muffin method, and so what I'm going to do is get my dry ingredients together, which I've just done, and then I'm going to create what's called a well in the center of my bowl. And by doing that, when I'm ready to incorporate my liquid ingredients, I will be able to add them into the bowl and then slowly incorporate them. So as you know, I like to crack my eggs into a separate container. So I have my milk and my butter. I'm going to pour my milk and my butter together. Into my milk container, I'm going to add my egg. I do that separate so that way in case I have a bad egg, I won't have to discard the whole batter, number one. And then if I get eggshells in it, like I said, I won't have to discard the whole batter. So I'm mixing my butter, my eggs, and my milk together at this stage. And then I'm going to go ahead and pour that into the center of my mixing bowl. And hopefully you can kind of see what's going on. And then I'm going to take my rubber spatula, and then I'm just going to slowly incorporate the milk, the butter, and the egg into my dry ingredients. And I did say we're making blueberry muffins. And so I've pre-measured out a half cup of fresh blueberries. They've been properly washed. And again, our goal is not to overmix, because if you overmix, then you develop holes in your muffins. Those holes we refer to as being tunnels. And that's something we want to avoid. Pour up a little bit of that water that I still had on here. And then I'm going to add my fresh blueberries to my batter, like so. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. We have blueberry muffin batter. And what I have done is line a muffin pan already with muffin wrappers. And I'm taking my scoop and I'm going to scoop my batter into the muffin liners. And I want to make sure I evenly distribute the batter out amongst the muffins. And then I'm going to go ahead and put these into the oven at 400 degrees, and they're going to bake for 20 to 25 minutes in the oven. And then we'll have some fresh baked blueberry muffins.